Hi everyone, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie, and today I have a little assorted swatch and review of Broken Pixel polish. Broken Pixel might sound familiar because they were one of the few indies that I shared a couple of months ago at this point, highlighting these anti-ice charity polishes, or you may have seen them on Polish Pickup, and Michelle graciously reached out to me asking if I'd be interested in some PR, so here we are. Broken Pixel is a small, relatively new indie brand based in central New Jersey. And like I said, I have these assorted shades, so they're not from any one collection. Generally assorted finishes too, but a lot of shimmers and in a mainly rainbow color palette. So without further ado, let me just show you the swatches. The first polish I have is Jersey Tomato, which is a tomato red jelly. This one had a really nice formula, super smooth, pigmented, decent coverage on the first coat as well. I feel like I had a little bit of sheerness on the left side of my nail compared to the rest, but it was pretty even for the most part, and as expected for a jelly polish, it did even out beautifully on the second coat, giving a super glassy, shiny look, while still showing a lot of my nail line. Even with 3 coats, that's not really going to be covered up at all, but it does intensify the color a little bit more. As a born and raised Jersey girl, I love this one. It's a perfect tomato red with that gorgeous, warm, orangey undertone. Next we have Citrus Drift, which is a sheer orange jelly with a super glowy magenta fuchsia finely milled shimmer. So from the bottle, I could tell that this was going to be a jelly polish, but I wasn't expecting it to be this sheer on the first coat. As you can see, you barely get a wash of that orange base color, but you do get a lot of that glowy shimmer. So I feel like depending on what you layer this over, it could work as a topper. It did build up pretty nicely in 2 coats. Again, very even coverage, super smooth and silky to apply, but I think this one definitely shines after doing a 3rd coat just because you get more of that orangey base color. But of course, because of how sheer it is, it's not going to do anything to cover up your nail line. So if that bothers you, you might want to use this over an orange or just a blurring base. Also, that fuchsia magenta colored shimmer also shifts to this reddish color in more extreme lighting. Next up we have What's That in the Mustard, which is a yellow jelly with a pink to red shifting shimmer. So this one is most similar to the last shade with that really sheer jelly kind of base and that super glowy finely milled shimmer. I actually found that this one had a little bit more color and coverage on the first coat, so you get a little bit more color payoff, but it is still going to be sheer, not cover up any of your nail line. And even though this one kind of has, mustard in the name, I don't really think I would agree with calling it a mustard yellow color. I almost see it as having a yellow green sort of shade. I'm not sure if that has anything to do with the iridescent shimmer just sort of affecting how the base color looks, but it definitely is a weird funky shade. Also, I almost forgot to mention, because the shimmer in this shade and the previous is so finely milled, I feel like it almost gives it a pearlescent look. Then we have that Ramune Pop, which I think I would call a minty green, crelly, jelly leaning formula with a glowy blue shimmer. So as you can see, this has a bit more coverage and pigmentation in the base, a little bit more milky looking, and the shimmer is slightly larger compared to the previous 2 shades, so it doesn't have that same pearlescent effect, but it is still really glowy. The formula wasn't difficult to work with or anything, but from the first coat, I did have some patchy spots here and there. It wasn't as even coverage as the previous shades, for example, and doing a 2nd coat did even it out for the most part. I think if you look close enough, there might be some darker spots, like on the left side of my nail or the upper right corner where I have that little indent. So I did also want to show this one in a 3rd coat just to show you how it builds up, and it's definitely a super cute color. Next up, we have Celeste, which is a light pastel blue crelly with a super dainty blue shimmer. So I found the formula on this to be most similar to the previous shade, kind of having this slightly milky leaning crelly formula, and unfortunately not 100% even on the first coat, but it does even out a bit better on the second coat, while also providing a decent amount of coverage too. Like if you look close enough, you can still see some nail line. So if you do want to obscure that even more, you could do a third coat, which makes it look almost fully opaque, like maybe 99% of the way there. And yeah, I thought this one was really cute, super dainty. The shimmer in here is obviously very subtle, like I said, especially compared to the previous shades, which are super glowy and in your face, but I do love the soft little twinkle it has. Also, this is a glow in the dark shade, so I have the 3 coats in both of these clips, just showing the difference between charging it under flash versus a UV flashlight. Back to the glowy shimmers though, the next shade we have is Cotton Candy Energy Rush, which I wouldn't call a cotton candy pink. I feel like this is a bit darker and warmer toned, but it's still a gorgeous shade of pink in a jelly base, and this one is filled with a super glowy aqua to cobalt blue shifting shimmer. Even though this is another shimmer polish, I feel like it does look a little bit different compared to the other glowy shimmers like the orange and yellow, where those were a bit more finely milled. The shimmer particles in the shade are a little bit larger or maybe just more sparse, so it gives it a slightly different look to the glow, if that makes sense. And yeah, this one, it just also built up really beautifully in 2 or 3 coats. I found this one to be very even coverage as well, decently pigmented too. It's not as sheer as the orange, for example, but you still can see nail line after 3 coats, but that doesn't bother me, especially not in this shade of pink with a blue shimmer. It's so pretty. Now, getting away from the rainbow lineup, the next shade I have is for Thieves Vinegar, which is another shimmery base, but this one is filled with a multi-chrome metallic flaky as well. I can't tell if this does have a clear base or if there is like a subtle wash of this taupey kind of color to it, but either way, as you can see, it is super packed with the flakies, so I guess it could work as a topper. It's just a little too dense for what I like personally. So I am going to be building this up in 3 coats just to show you how it looks. Even on the second coat, it does look really full coverage, but again, because it has such a light, barely tinted base, you are still going to see some nail line, but I feel like it is pretty obscured because of the multi-chrome shimmer and all of those multi-chrome little flakes. I feel like both the shimmer and flakes have the same kind of color shift, going from a pink to coppery orange to gold and green in extreme lighting. Next we have Magic Brownies, which is a sheer brown jelly filled with a green to silver shifting shimmer. I feel like this technically should fall in the Prugly category, but I really love this one. There's something so interesting about the combination that just kind of does it for me. The shimmer, as you can see, is incredibly glowy. It's super densely packed, even though it's not as finely milled as some of the earlier ones. I actually think the visual finish of it reminded me the most of Cotton Candy Energy Rush, for example. And while it was pretty sheer on the first coat, as expected for being a jelly, I think it did build up pretty nicely on just the 2 coats, so I left it here. I also love the shift that the shimmer has, almost going to this white and silver color, but I feel like there's even a hint of a purpley pink at the edges. Next we have 20 cash regular, which, if you don't know, is what you say to the gas attendant when you're getting gas in Jersey. So this one, I'm assuming, is inspired by the gasoline, having a blackened base with a multi-chrome shimmer, going from copper to gold to green in extreme lighting. I almost wish there was a pinky shift in here as well, but as you saw, this had a phenomenal formula, just so incredibly full coverage on the first coat alone. Not quite a 1-coater, it still is a touch sheer where, depending on the angles, you could still see through to your nail line, but because it's so dark, it was fully opaque in just 2 coats. And the last polish I have is Apocalypse, which is Broken Pixel's version of a black to red multi-chrome. I actually found this one to be a little bit lighter, almost like a charcoal leaning base color, and the multi-chrome pigment itself almost had that sort of lavender shade head on that still transitions to a red color in more extreme lighting. And obviously this also is filled with a scattered holographic effect too. The formula, as you saw, was a little bit on the jelly leaning side, still decently pigmented though, so it does build up to be practically fully opaque for me in 2 coats. Maybe if you do thinner coats or if your nails are longer, you might need a third for this one. I love how dark and moody this one is. I know I've been so late to the black to red multi-chrome train, but they're just so satisfying. And here's a little thumb swatch collage of the polishes that I shared today. I just love, obviously, the rainbow lineup and even the non-rainbow shades too. Jumping right into comparisons, here is Jersey Tomato next to Crack's Tomahto and Cirque's Scarlet Jelly. I initially thought Tomato was going to be a dupe, but as you can see, it is a bit more sheer, especially on the first coat, while Cirque is a little bit closer in terms of level of pigmentation and saturation. Once you do a second coat, the Cracked does catch up, but color-wise, these are all still pretty different. Next for Citrus Drift, I thought the closest shades I had were Crack's Footworthy and Mooncat's Poems for a Harvest Moon, which are both oranges with purpley pink shimmers. Obviously though, the main difference is their coverage. This is 2 coats of each. For What's in the Mustard, I thought the closest shade I had was Mooncat's Murraya's Melody, but that one's a bit lighter, more pastel, with a more whitened yellow shimmer. For that Ramune Pop, I thought the closest shade I had was Fauve's Degas from their Monet collection, and I figured I could also show it next to Mooncat's Ribbit because it's another green with a blue shimmer, but that one's a lot more vibrant in its color. Degas has a similar sort of minty, spearmint sort of shade of green, a bit more pastel and whitened, so closer to that Ramune Pop, but not a dupe because it's not as light. I actually thought because it's so light, it might be more similar to some Cirque jelly, so here is Sweet Mint and Honeydew, and it's kind of an in-between, maybe closer to Honeydew. Next for Celeste, here's a quick look at it next to Mooncat's Moonlight Lullaby, which kind of has a blue base, but it's not as blue as Celeste, and it also has a much brighter whitened shimmer, making it look slightly metallic. I thought closer blues were maybe Mooncat's Dewpearls or Sabertooth. Between these two, Sabertooth is definitely the closer one, so I'm going to be comparing that on the nail because Dewpearls is a little bit more aqua leaning, but even on the nail, Sabertooth is a little bit more glowy with its shimmer and maybe darker or just not as whitened in its base. And even though these aren't really dupes because they're so different in their formulas, I thought the color of Celeste reminded me a lot of Crack's Twiggy Blue, which is just a cream polish, so on the nail, these again don't compare, but they're kind of in the same family. For Cotton Candy, I figured I could show this next to Mooncat's Merkitten, which is a lot darker and more cool toned. So I thought the closest shade to the base was Apocalypse's You've Got Red on You, which is a thermal, so here it is in the cold state. But that one's a lot more creamy in its formula, and it has a warm toned pink shimmer as well. Then for Magic Brownies, I was immediately reminded of Sylvanclaw's Mushroom Whimsy, which is another brown base with a glowy green shimmer, and I figured I could also include Mooncat's Lust for Vengeance, which does have a similar green glowy shimmer, but the base in that is a little bit more berry leaning in color. So between these two, Sylvanclaw is definitely closest to being a dupe. I remember that one being a lot more sheer, but seeing the coverage on 1 and 2 coats, I feel like they are pretty identical. The only difference I could really see is maybe in the undertone, but I think it's just so hard for me to describe that it's easier to call them dupes. Then for 20 regular cash, I have Glisten & Glow's New Jersey Pine Barrens, which was a polish pickup shade. I thought it was going to be closer, but there really isn't that orangey copper in the Glisten & Glow. The shimmer just starts at a yellow, but they do both shift to green, although the other big difference is the shimmer size and particle density, where it's a lot more finely milled in 20 regular. And lastly for Apocalypse, here it is next to Mooncat's Gates of Hell and Holotaco's Double Dare, which are their black to red multi-chromes. Obviously, both of these are a bit darker than Apocalypse, but Gates of Hell does have a little bit of that purple burgundy tone to it, but with Apocalypse being a bit more sheer, I actually thought it was going to be closer to Sassy Sauce's Wicked Sorcery, which is a black to red multi-chrome magnetic, and I feel like it's the closest. Like, it's pretty spot on with that slightly lavender sort of color that then transitions to red in extreme light. The only thing it's missing is the holo. And of course, for reference, I also have to include ILNP's Eclipse, which is a true black base with a really strong red shift. So that wraps up my swatches and comparisons of Broken Pixel Polish. As always, I would love to know what you think of these shades and if you have heard of Broken Pixel before or if you've tried them out yourself. Like I mentioned in the intro, they were a brand that I featured a few months ago for one of their charity polishes, and I've only really seen them on Polish Pickup, but this was my first time trying them, and overall it was a really nice experience. Like, all of the formulas were just super smooth, they applied like butter, they self-leveled really nicely and had pretty nice coverage for the most part. I know the orange was still surprisingly sheer, like I wasn't expecting it to be that sheer, but I also ended up liking it for that reason, even though I'm still not fully sold on like the actual shade of the base color. I still can't tell how much I really like it, but for the most part the other shades I thought were really gorgeous. And even though I did have like a lot of shimmers to try here, there was some sort of variety, with some of them being really glowy, more finely milled, while others had a slightly larger particle size compared to that and were a little bit more subtle too. I guess if anything, the only things I maybe don't like are some of the colors, like I mentioned with the orange or even the yellow, where there's just something about the shade of them that I'm not super in love with. But it could also just be that I'm not really craving these like softer muted shades right now, because, you know, for summer I'm just craving more bold and saturated shades. So that's more of like a personal preference thing. But yeah, if you are interested in trying any of these shades or just checking out more of what Broken Pixel has to offer, I will have their website linked in the description box. Sorry, have to interrupt here. I didn't realize that their shop was going to be temporarily closed during the month of July. They only have these 3 polishes available for pre-order because they are going to be busy at Polish and Beauty Expo, or PBE, in a couple of weekends. So as of right now, you can't really get any of the polishes that I showed in the video, but I'm pretty sure it'll be back to normal starting August 1st. And yeah, I really hope that you found this video helpful. Leave me a like if you did, or just leave me any and all thoughts you have down below so we can chat about it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!